My husband poisoned my plants and thought it was funny. Here's how I fought back. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The kind where the sun sits low and casts lazy golden rays through the windows, making the house feel warmer than it was. My favorite kind of day. Actually, a perfect day for watering my plants. I always kept a modest indoor garden, succulents in the windowsill, ferns by the bookcase, a few spider plants and pothos draped over shelves, reaching down like tendrils of nature in my home. They gave the house life. Each one had a name, a spot, a memory attached, and as a woman without children, they'd quietly taken that place in my heart where you give love just to watch something grow. That day, however, something felt wrong. The plants weren't as lively as usual. Their leaves were drooping, edges browning, and there was an odd smell, something sharp and chemical, almost like bleach. It stung my nose when I bent close to inspect the once vibrant jade plant I'd nurtured from a mere clipping into a proud cluster of plump green leaves. It didn't make sense. I was always careful with them, giving just the right balance of water and light. I didn't understand how they could have declined so quickly. I sighed, attributing it to bad soil or maybe some bug infestation I couldn't see, and reached for the watering can. But as I poured a careful trickle over the plants, my mind couldn't shake the thought that something was off. I felt as if my garden wasn't dying naturally. It was as if someone had poisoned it. That's when I heard the door close. I looked up and saw John, my husband of 6 years, tossing his keys into the bowl on the console and pulling off his coat. He looked at me, a bit too nonchalant, with that signature crooked grin he wore whenever he was hiding something. Something wrong, hun? He asked, glancing toward the plants with a casual air. I hesitated. They look sick. I don't understand. They were fine a few days ago. He shrugged, feigning sympathy. Maybe you're overwatering them? His words sounded helpful, but there was an odd gleam in his eyes. The next few days, the plants continued to worsen. Leaves shriveled, tips browned, and more of that unmistakable bleach smell filled the room. I became paranoid, waking up in the middle of the night to check on my plants, my heart beating wildly as if they were children needing my attention. By Friday, 2 of my beloved spider plants looked close to dead, and I decided it was time to investigate more thoroughly. There was no way this was happening because of my care. I was meticulous, sometimes overly so, and that's when it struck me almost too absurd to consider. Like a joke in a dark comedy. John, he'd always found my devotion to the plants excessive. Once, he joked that it was like living in a jungle, making wild gorilla noises as he stumbled through the house. He'd laugh at me for talking to the plants, saying it was pointless, that they couldn't hear, but I never took it seriously. In all the time we'd been together, John had always been a bit cynical, dismissive of things he found silly or feminine. But sabotage? I didn't want to believe it. I tried pushing the thought away, feeling guilty for even considering it. But my suspicions grew with every passing day. Each time John came home, the plants seemed to suffer more. One afternoon, I decided to take action. I set up a small camera in the living room under the pretense of capturing some footage of the plants for documenting their progress. John smirked when I told him, making a dry comment about my plant passion project. I forced a smile, playing along, keeping my true intentions hidden. The following morning, my heart pounded as I reviewed the footage. The room still dark in the early dawn light. I watched as the familiar setting of our living room played on the screen. I sped through the early part of the footage, my patience thinning as I saw nothing unusual. And then, in the dead of night, at around 3:17 a.m., I watched in shock as my husband, clad in his pajamas, walked over to my plants, a bottle of what looked suspiciously like bleach in his hand. He leaned down, uncapped it, and poured a small amount into the soil of each plant. One by one, he moved slowly, with the careful precision of someone determined not to make a sound. My stomach clenched, a mix of horror and fury roiling inside me. This man, the one I'd promised to love and cherish, was deliberately killing the one thing in my life that gave me peace, that I cared for unconditionally. He didn't even hesitate, didn't seem to feel any remorse or conflict. I watched the footage 3 more times, each viewing building a resentment I couldn't contain. How could he? And more to the point, why would he? What kind of person would stoop to poisoning their spouse's beloved plants? The act felt intimate in a twisted way. He was violating something sacred to me, something he knew I cherished. This wasn't just childish mischief, this was malice. When John woke up that morning, I was already up, coffee steaming in my mug as I stared at the dying plants. He came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and yawning, blissfully unaware of the rage I was trying to keep buried beneath a calm exterior. "Morning, babe," he mumbled, pressing a lazy kiss to my cheek. I pulled away, unable to reciprocate. He looked at me, a flicker of something. Was it confusion in his gaze? "What's wrong? Did you not sleep well?" I gripped the coffee cup tighter, feeling the warmth against my palm. "I know what you've been doing, John." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The plants," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "I saw you on the camera, pouring bleach in the soil." For a moment, his face went completely blank, as if he'd been caught off guard. Then he scoffed, trying to play it off with that same cocky grin I'd once found endearing. "Oh, come on, I was just messing around. You take those plants way too seriously. I thought it'd be funny." "No harm done." "No harm done?" I repeated, disbelief flooding my voice. "These plants are my life, John. They're important to me. How could you possibly think killing them would be funny?" He shrugged, looking more irritated than apologetic. "Look, they're just plants, okay? You can get new ones. I didn't think you'd blow this out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" My voice cracked. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you realize how cruel that is?" I watched as his expression shifted from irritation to something colder, more defensive. "You're acting like I did something unforgivable. They're plants. For God's sake, this isn't some crime." The realization hit me hard. He didn't care. He truly didn't understand the gravity of what he'd done. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. Either way, this was no small prank. It was a deliberate attack on something he knew I loved. That alone spoke volumes about the kind of person he was. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You know what, John? If you can't respect the things I care about, maybe you don't belong here. You can have fun out there, on the streets." He looked at me, momentarily stunned. "You're kicking me out over a few plants?" "Yes, John, because this isn't about the plants. It's about the fact that you'd go out of your way to hurt something that matters to me. And if you can do that, then maybe you don't deserve to be in my life." He scoffed, grabbing his coat from the hook, muttering under his breath, "Fine, have fun with your precious plants." As the door slammed behind him, I felt a strange sense of relief. The house was quiet, peaceful. My plants, though suffering, would recover with time and care just as I would. This was a new beginning. And even though it hurt, I knew I'd made the right choice. In the days that followed, I poured my heart into nurturing my plants back to health. It took time, patience, and more love than I knew I had. But each new sprout, each resilient leaf, became a symbol of my strength. And as I watched them come back to life, I felt myself healing too, growing into someone stronger, someone who would never let anyone trample over the things that mattered most.